Hey everyone! A few people had asked for my take on Cult of the Lamb. Despite there being a lot of reviews out there, this one is pretty saturated. Based on the streams that I saw before the game came out and a lot of the reviews that popped up on day one, I would imagine Devolver reached out to a lot of reviewers to have them take a look at this and get you hyped up. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that, that's actually pretty common practice in a lot of cases. But the reason you might find this review a little bit different is I'm going to be very blunt and very honest about a lot of the misgivings and a lot of the broken parts of this game. Like I said, I did get a chance to see a number of streamers play this before I ever got my hands on it, and at first look you can tell it's an amalgam of a lot of different games put together. You don't have to look too close to see the influence of something like Hades. You'll definitely see a lot of Stardew Valley inspiration, and there's even a little bit of Moonlighter mixed in. Fans of my channel know that I'm a huge fan of clay games, and the art style was actually one of the biggest draws for me into this game. It looks very much like a clay game. First, I want to start with some of the stuff I really liked about this. The art style, of course, is great, and the dark theme of the game, mixed with the fact that you've got this very cartoony and cutesy style, it's very cool, very unique. In a similar vein to both Hades and Moonlighter, the game loop consists of leaving town, gathering things, coming back to town, and slowly improving it over the course of time. The game itself is surprisingly more fight-centric and maybe action-centric than a lot of people are probably realizing from first look. As you progress, you unlock different lands which have different materials and a different vibe in each of them. But the primary purpose of why you're here and what you're doing is to basically free the devil. Or that's what it feels like anyway. And I say all that to mention that it is procedurally generated as you enter into each of these dungeons, so it's going to be different every time, though it will feel very samey because a lot of the rooms aren't varied. If we're looking purely at the fight scenes, the fight sequences, and how those dungeons are generated, and I'm comparing Hades versus Cult of the Lamb, Hades has a very clear advantage in a lot of ways. Cult of the Lamb controls feel much floatier, and it's much more difficult, at least in my opinion, to get your character exactly where you want them. With Hades and those very tight action sequences, a lot of what you could do came from how well you could control your character. And the hitboxes in this game are incredibly weird. In Hades, when you get a boon from a god, it would vastly change your combat experience. You could play with a completely different style, and you had a lot of choices when upgrading. Not so much with Cult of the Lamb. Not only do the weapon options seem a lot more limited, but they're very limited in what their expandability is. There's a lot of spells, but many of them are kind of samey. And tarot cards, I'm just going to be honest, they're not as fun as some of the boons from the gods. As a player moves from one room to the next in the dungeon, they hope for and expect a little bit of variety from room to room. And while you might find a surprise in the room that you didn't necessarily expect, most of the rooms here are just square-shaped, with varied sizes and a number of different obstacles kind of in the middle. Whereas Hades at least felt like there was a lot more variety in what the room might look like. And there seemed to be a lot more prevalence in Hades of things like traps or pits that would cause you to change your playstyle to adapt. That's not to say that those things don't exist within the world of Cult of the Lamb, it's just a lot less common. I guess the easiest way to compare how I felt about the fighting in Cult of the Lamb versus Hades is when I finished a run in Hades, I was very much looking forward to the next one, and maybe not so much within Cult of the Lamb. Now, that could have a lot to do with the base building aspect, which is the second half of this game, so let's talk about that. I think a lot of the people that loved Stardew Valley are going to like some of the aspects of this game, but I didn't say love. Maintaining your cult is definitely not as easy as what you might assume. There are needs that have to be met and resources that'll need to be upkept. For example, beds just fall apart for no reason, and you are the only person in the entire village who can cook. I think a lot of these concepts sounded great on paper, but they feel more like an interruption to what you're trying to accomplish. For example, you could be in the middle of a dungeon, fighting your way towards the boss and get a message that your people are starving. If you're able to, you can escape the dungeon, lose what you've done as far as progress, and potentially make some food in time to keep somebody from dying. But essentially, the game forces you to be extra prepared before you even leave for the dungeons, so that becomes your new mantra. Making sure to maintain the right amount of beds, making sure to upgrade things because stuff is breaking all the time, making sure that you keep resources on deck to repair things as they break. In addition to all that, you have to deal with food and also faith. Faith in this game is extremely fickle, but also a little bit hilarious, I'll be honest. You somehow gain faith by sacrificing people, doing all manner of terrible things to them. Somehow that makes them believe in you even harder. Suffice it to say, my take on the base building experience is there's room for improvement. I feel like there was definitely plenty of ways this could have been made a little bit better, a little bit less frustrating. For example, assigning a farmer implies that that person should be able to pick the berries. I shouldn't have to be the only one that can pick berries, leaving the other person to plant seeds and all that other jazz. And the same thing with cooking food. It feels like there should have been a way to meet some minimum expectations in an automatic type of way without the player directly having to interact. Now that also might be because foods in this game for some reason have negative effects, and a lot of them can hurt you, make you sick, or even kill you. That's my mistake for not assuming that the food in the game would somehow kill me, but I didn't read the recipes. I didn't actually look at the effects the first time, so the first time this happened and I started losing people, it was a little frustrating. It's almost painful to be this honest about the game because there's a lot of parts here that I really did want to love. When you're playing it though, at least in my experience, it felt like if I spent too much time in my town, my people would end up starving, so I was constantly being pulled from one direction to another. It makes it very difficult to explore this expanding game map with new locations that are being allowed. Though I will say that the locations that did open up that I was allowed to see reminded me a lot of Littlewood. They weren't like full locations. They were each location surrounding a gimmick. For example, one of them is for gambling, another one would be for fishing. I feel like it's been a while since I've reviewed a game that I've had to make so many comparisons, and there's nothing at all that's wrong with building on the shoulders of giants to make your game better or more innovative. The problem is that by mixing so many unique and different concepts together, I feel like they really muddied the waters here. Unfortunately, where this game fails is to really improve on any of those existing systems in a measurable way. It's not as fun a town builder as Stardew Valley. It's not as great a fighting game as Hades. There are going to be people that have a great time with this though. They're just going to be the people who probably haven't played those other games to make the comparison. I hope I didn't anger too many lambs out there in the audience, but agree, disagree, I'm definitely interested in your opinion in the comments below. I appreciate those of you who've already subscribed. Please hit that button if you haven't already, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for watching.